Hello, everyone, and welcome to PT Live. Today, my guest is Ingram Leedy, who is the CEO of Protected Trust. And today, our topic is going to be about creating the modern workplace. It's actually a part of a 6-part series, maybe more, maybe less.
Maybe more.
It could be less. But today, we're going to focus on the topic of connectivity. So, Ingram, tell us about an interesting lunch you had with a client who got this whole ball rolling.
Well, hi, thank you, Steve, for having me on the show.
Yeah, you're welcome.
This is all new format, right? The whole idea of this, it's a story. It's basically our journey of going through our IT changes that we've made in the last year. It starts off with really actually started off with a lunch meeting I had with a client, and they kind of invited us to talk about like their security and things that they should be doing. They look at us as a security expert. And he was wanting to make sure he was doing everything that they should be doing and wanted a roadmap of like all the things they should be doing. Mm-hmm. And so we sort of sat down and talked about it, but I just realized that it was sort of like really it was our story. We're a 15-year-old company and had a lot of legacy things and kind of grown over years and years. And we faced the same sort of problems that any other business has, is that our IT was aging and certain things work well and certain things didn't. So that's what we did. We kind of go with these 5 or 6 pillars, and we've sort of been talking about those a lot. And I think that's what our intention is, to talk more about them and what they are.
Right. So the first example that you went over with this client was the wireless inside of our office.
Oh yeah. Wireless is such a pain. So I mean, it seems like every client we go to, including ourselves at the time, is like you get into a meeting somewhere and you hook up your laptop and the wireless just doesn't work.
That's right.
You know?
I'm sure we can all relate to that.
I mean, I could pretty much go to any client and their wireless is broken.
Or they bring out the cable and you got to plug in.
Well, if you're mirroring some sort of video or something like that,
right?
Yeah, it never works. Right?
Never does. No.
Yeah, so you sort of panic like for a minute, don't you? Mm-hmm. Well, I hate that feeling of panic, and it's frustrating to me, and it just is like I was tired of it. Mm-hmm. And I think we've been through every type of like wireless solution. Like we've used all the major brands, the like the Cisco kind of stuff, Juniper. I mean, we've been through all Ubiquity, all these different systems, and we really had to sit down and figure out why wireless was broken first, and then what we're going to do to fix it.
Right. It seems like no matter which office you go to, it's become standard that the wireless is just bad.
Oh, it's kind of like a joke. It's like
it's a joke with every office.
Yeah, wireless isn't so good or something like that.
And everyone just accepts that as that's the way it should be, right?
Yeah. I think for me, I just wouldn't take that for an answer. So really what we did is the first thing we did is had to figure out what the problem was, and we're kind of computer nerds, so we got all these like Wi-Fi spectrum analyzers and these wireless devices that would like listen to the signals and try to listen and try to map out everything that was going on, and that's what we did. So, all these pretty pictures of like interference that we found out was going on in the office, and in our building there's about 30 other companies, right. And what we found out is that each of those companies has their own wireless access, and all that wireless interferes with each other. And
that's a surprising fact, because you would think with the concrete blocks that it would block out some of that.
Yeah, and it does some of it, and that actually contributes to the problem too. There's also like glass. Wi-Fi will bounce off glass and do all kinds of weird things.
Is that right?
Yeah. Microwaves interfere with Wi-Fi. It's all about this frequency. It's called 2.4, and most wireless systems are 2.4 gigahertz. Mm-hmm. And if you remember the old handheld phones, that used to have with a big antenna on it.
Oh, sure.
That ran on 2.4 gigahertz. So most everything, like baby monitors run on 2.4, mm-hmm. Microwaves broadcast at 2.4. Everybody in their office has a microwave. In fact, in our building, we have this MRI machine downstairs too, and I'm pretty certain that's contributing to a lot of the problems downstairs. But yeah, wireless is just a pain in the ass, mm-hmm. Really it is. And not until we figured out that's the problem, then we try to figure out what to do about it. Mm-hmm.
And so you like to use an analogy of it's hard to imagine Wi-Fi because you can't see it, right?
No, you can't see it.
So you like to use the analogy of being in a stadium and talking to someone.
Yeah, I've used that analogy a lot. If you think of it, Wi-Fi is sort of like a bubble or a sound wave. It's if you think of someone talking, in a large stadium like our building, it's a building with a bunch of people in it. It's really hard to have a conversation in a stadium when everyone is screaming. Especially if you're talking to somebody that's maybe several rows away, you're not going to be able to hear that person. And that's what's going on with Wi-Fi right now. Now, the way to solve that, there is a way to solve that. So there's a frequency range 2.4 in most computers and most systems, and most legacy Wi-Fi uses the 2.4. And the reason 2.4 is used is because it will go through walls, it will go through concrete. And so if you're 4 or 5 walls deep into something, it will go through that. And that's a good thing because you want the broadest range as you can, right? But because you have so much interference, everyone else is doing that to you as well. And there are techniques in the system inherently where there's like these different channels, and the things are supposed to be smart, and they jump around to different channels. But when you're really saturated in a network, that just stuff doesn't work. So the way to do that is sort of my analogy of it is if you're in the stadium and you do want to have a conversation with somebody, is you would then sit next to them and you would have like a coffee shop, sort of like we're doing here.
Sort of like our setup here.
Is you'd have a coffee shop set up, and you and I would just sit closer together, and we would more or less whisper to each other and talk to each other. And then and it's just like a football game, you and I might be sitting next to each other and we can still have a conversation even though everybody in the world is screaming, right?
Right.
So this new technology, it's not new, but it's in the most modern systems, is this 5 gigahertz. And what it requires is more access points, or more wireless access points, because you got to spread them across your office.
Because we're whispering now, we're not
shouting.
We're
whispering, and we got to have a little more. We have to have a bunch of little coffee shops in our office, basically.
Right.
And then when we get together, we kind of talk to each other like quietly. And there's one little more technical thing, is because we have the multiple access points, they all have to coordinate with each other too. So like if you're in one coffee shop and I just happen to be across the hall in another coffee shop, but we still want to talk to each other, the two Wi-Fi systems sort of have to know about each other so that you and I can, our computers don't get confused about which coffee shop I'm in.
I see. So what would happen if the computers do get confused? Would it just drop the connectivity, or would it just slow it down?
Well, if you were to go out and say down to your local office supply store and buy a Wi-Fi solution, and you just bought a bunch of Wi-Fi access points,
which we have done.
Yeah, we have done that. Is that they would, since they're not coordinated, they're not intelligent, and so your computer has to keep jumping off and jumping onto different networks, and probably different wireless access points or different names too.
Oh, I see.
Because then they start to interfere with each other too. They're just like more people screaming. So that makes sense.
That explains a lot, actually.
Yeah, they're called concentrators, and they're real technical terms that IT guys will throw around. But it's a coordinated system, and typically you need like a concentrator that is like a server. It's like a server in a way that coordinates all the Wi-Fi communications. And so in the not too recent old days, is that you had to. It's a sophisticated setup, pretty much. I mean, it requires a lot of knowledge to understand how Wi-Fi works. But lately, though, there's new systems and new technology exists that will do this in the cloud. So the concentrator is sort of in the cloud that does all this communications and set up automatically. So it just makes it easier for someone like us or other companies to set it all up.
So just go to a web page and configure it.
Sort of, in a way. We use a system called like Cisco Meraki. It's one of the big solid cores that we're using, and it takes advantage of that cloud technology.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of people don't take advantage of, well, as you know, I saw myself, things like Meraki can bring to the table. Like there's so much information coming from your Wi-Fi that people they think of Wi-Fi as just, this is the thing I use to get to the internet and look at funny cat pictures and that sort of thing. But by connecting to the office's Wi-Fi, there's actually a ton of data that comes.
That. To me, we spend so much money on these networks and infrastructure and stuff, and you hook it all up, and you sort of don't know what's really going on inside it. Like we don't really, in the past, we don't know, or most clients don't know what their network's being used for. And with these systems like Meraki, it gives us so much visibility on what is happening, like what applications people go to. It's not like Big Brother, but it's just like if you had a problem with your network, you can troubleshoot it. So we can actually look at like what a user is using, or if there's a bad Ethernet cable, or if the Wi-Fi, there's an interference somewhere, we can determine where it is and actually pinpoint its location as well. So it's amazing stuff, and to me, it just gives us knowledge. That's the big reason of the why, is like it gives us knowledge and it just works. It's that simple.
And without a device like a Meraki, how would you normally get that information?
You would have probably an ad hoc set of equipment like other switches and routers and collection of things that may not all work together, but you could probably cobble those things up.
Mm-hmm.
It's just it just creates it more complicated. It requires you to have an IT guy that knows what he's doing,
Mm-hmm.
and really a network engineer. And network engineers, good network engineers that know and understand all this stuff are really hard to find. So what this stuff is doing and this technology is doing is really simplifying network deployments and in a way for you to manage it remotely anywhere in the world. Mm-hmm. It really is almost revolutionary networking.
Right. And speaking of revolutionary, what we're trying to do, or what you're trying to do rather, is make an office that you can pick up and go.
Yeah, I've been using this concept called the office in the box.
Mm-hmm.
I love that idea that it's tangible. I mean, so much of what we buy these days is all virtual or in the cloud. Is these concepts you can't touch. But I love the idea to think that an office is just everything you need to run an office is in a box. It's like going down to your local like Staples or Home Office Depot
Mm-hmm.
and saying I need all these file folders and things to help me, pens and paper, copy paper, things
like a briefcase.
Yeah,
like,
you need everything to be a businessman, right?
Uh-huh.
So I think the idea is that there's like a group of technology that you need that would just basically run your office, and it's really the same stuff on every company at just different scales. Is all it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
With that in mind, we also like to talk about along with connectivity, the productivity piece of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so we may be jumping ahead into another pillar, but the way that people communicate internally in the office using a shared file storage.
Okay.
Right? We like to talk about that. And accessing that file storage when you're not in the office,
Yeah.
and what a pain that can be.
That's the next problem, right? So
Right.
saying you got your wireless and you got your network working, right?
Right.
And one thing we sort of skip, but we can come back at another time. But is your computer has to be kind of modern too, so it can connect to the wireless. But,
Oh, that's right, because
Yeah.
it also has to be able to broadcast at the 5
that
gigahertz?
5 gigahertz, and a lot of the older computers don't have that technology in them. So what we did in our office is we replaced all the computers, and there's a whole kind of subject around that, because how to make that deployment easier. But to me, the biggest focus, though, and you're right, is the file system. I mean, to me, that is the number one app. Well, besides email, file server is probably the biggest app there's out there. Is like everybody has a group drive or an H drive,
Mm-hmm.
and the file server, and it's the place where you put everything. The analogy is that it's like a big file system, and if you went down to Home Depot Office Depot or Staples, you'd buy a big filing cabinet and you'd put it in the middle of your office, and that's where everybody accesses and stores everything, and it's supposed to be in a safe place and backed up and all this stuff.
Right.
The problem with all that is that first, it's hard to manage all that storage. It gets really big, and the biggest frustration I have is like when I go off-site from the office. I'm at a client's office, or I'm like at home, or I'm traveling, is that it's really hard for me to access those files.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have to use these technologies like VPN that basically are complicated ways to protect and secure this information. The problem is if I want to share it with you or someone else in the office or someone externally in the office, it's another big pain in the butt. It's like I've got to have all this technology, the weird things, and I have to remember all these things and other passwords I got to know,
Right.
just to share a file.
Plus, how can you fit that filing cabinet in your suitcase for your office
Yeah.
in a box, right?
Yeah. So the concept is take advantage of cloud again, and there's ways to, and people have heard of things like Dropbox or Google Drive, and in the Microsoft world that we play in, it's called OneDrive, and I also call OneDrive and SharePoint. They're kind of the two different legged stool. But the idea is that you can, one thing, first of all, it's all backed up and it has revision control. The big thing it has is that, if you save a file and save it multiple times, or if someone else is editing the file, which is another feature, it remembers all the different versions you saved. So if like I went, I'll be working on a file sometimes and I'll write something. I'll be like, oh my God, that's completely not what I want. I'll hit Control Z or back up and undo my changes, but yet I've gone to the place where I can't go undo anymore. So I may want to undo from like 2 days ago. I can go into revision history and like pull that old version up.
Right. In the previous live stream we've had, we went over the topic of installing Office 2016 on your computer.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to everyone that they've made it so it's really hard to mess up. they try to dummy proof everything. So with things like the versioning, where you can go back in time, they try to make it so that you get out of your own way. It kind of fixes those problems ahead of time for you.
I was watching your video cast the other day, and I learned something from you. You taught me something. It was something about how I forget. What
it was autosave.
Yeah, autosave.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the piece of it, just that whether you use it or not use it,
Right.
Yeah, some of this technology sometimes that's why I like your program, because it's like you get this. I'm kind of talking the big picture stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and then you kind of go in and talk about like how do you use it,
Right.
and like the butts and buttons here and what they do and things like that, because there's some sometimes I don't know how you are with the computers, but it's always like there's always somebody that's mentoring me.
Mm-hmm.
There's always somebody that knows how to do something, and I learn something from them. Like Excel, like Excel was like
we have an Excel guy.
Yeah, there's always the Excel guru, and he's like, "Oh, did you know how to use a pivot table?" Like
right,
that was like, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And like you sit down and you learn it. You're like, "Oh my god, that is so cool!" And then you kind of like put it in your toolkit, But I think the same thing with you, and hopefully that's how these video series will go. Is that we'll start learning these little tidbits and tips and things like that will really help us.
Yeah, we're trying to educate as well as entertain, hopefully. But yeah, the more information that we can let people know about, products like Cisco Meraki and the things that they can do with OneDrive, Office 365, and now Microsoft 365, which is a new kind of confusing thing.
Yeah, it's a lot of people may be familiar with what Office 365 is, which is basically a collection of online tools, like the ones you're most familiar with and the ones you like Word, Excel, and things like that, Outlook. And now these tools are available online. That's the Office 365. But there's this thing I call the M365 or Microsoft 365, which is really adding the Windows and adding security as a service as well. And it's probably a lot more another in-depth topic we talk about, but like you were talking about Office, when you subscribe to Office, this new like file server we were talking about, it's like you just get all the latest updates and all the security updates and all the feature updates just happen. You don't think about them. It's like your iPhone. You just turn it on and it says, hey, I gotta put an update on, and then you get all these new features and you don't think about it.
Right. So having worked in the service desk department, I know from experience that either people don't update at all.
Sure.
And they want to know why their computer's not running optimally.
Yeah.
Optimally. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And then there's people who are very they want to make sure that they get the updates right away.
Yeah.
And they have an entire program in place to make sure
Yeah.
that everything's tested. And so I believe, if I'm understanding M365 correctly, that you can be put on sort of different plans of how you want to be deployed.
They're called rings, and they have like an insider ring or a pilot ring. Well, insider ring is probably the first ring, and so it's you're getting all the kind of like the beta type stuff, like the newest features as they come out. I wouldn't say they're completely beta, but they're like in preview.
Okay.
And then so if you're cutting edge and you want to have all the latest stuff, you get in that ring and you'll get more updates more often. And then the next ring is sort of like a pilot ring. It's sort of like, hey, this stuff works and it's working really well. Let's roll it out into more kind of a more early adopter kind of group. And so kind of a midstream. And really our company, that's the version we're subscribed to. Most of the support people and all the staff we have working for us, they're on that ring, which is basically a moderate ring. It's like, it's not the cutting edge, but it's like where everybody should be. And then there's sort of like that lagger ring, which is the ring where like, hey, I'm worried about like all these updates and feature changes, and I don't want to introduce new features right now. And so that ring is a little slower. But in the meantime, no matter what ring you're on, you're also getting all the security updates. And one thing I even noticed the other day, so somebody showed me here, is that the old days the updates would say like KB XX, and you have to go look it up, and there's a web page.
That's right. That's right.
And now they actually say what it is in the update.
Right. Yeah. I think our support manager told us that in the live stream.
Yeah.
Exactly before.
That's probably where I saw it.
Yeah, maybe. But right. But yeah, so like for example, if I open up Outlook now, and it's after an update, it'll be like, hey, all right, here are the new features.
It tells you,
yeah. It tells you no matter which app you open, it's going to tell you exactly what changed. Yeah,
I like that a lot.
So I think his example was to use Clippy. Remember that guy from the Word documents? So no one really enjoyed Clippy, but I think people will enjoy this instance where it's actually providing you useful information.
I mean, going up a level here, we're talking about the wireless and how it's kind of, you really need to have that stuff just work, right?
Right.
And you were talking about the file server. I mean, the stuff that we're entering into right now with the technology and the cloud and the thing like Microsoft 365 is, in my opinion, it's almost like revolutionary. The way people are using and digesting information. Sometimes I'll give an analogy. It's like using Outlook. Outlook has been my like organizer in my life for the last 20 years. It's kept track of what I'm doing today, what I'm doing tomorrow, what I'm supposed to be doing, how I'm communicating with people. And that's been a great tool. And I think Outlook and email have served its place, and it still will. I don't think email is going away. But these new tools, and we probably something like Microsoft Teams, which is kind of like part of the file server concept you've been talking about, is a way that we can now communicate in small teams. So we can get in a small group, we can collaborate on the files, on like analytic information like Power BI or share files, all kinds of things. We can communicate with video conferencing. Kind of one of the really fun, exciting things we've been doing is we have these other employees that work at other states.
Yes, that's true
like
too.
we get on the phone with them or on the video conference, and we just think of video conferencing as Skype, right? Skype for Business. And we just get on there and we're like, it's like they're there, and we can share files and we can annotate like a presentation, or we can just talk about stuff. And it's really nice because it's made us like all connected together, even if you're at home or across the world. We're just all connected. I really like that.
And I like the I like how I think if I understand their engineers, which I probably don't, but the way I like to think of it is kind of what I said before. They're trying to design it so you get out of your own way.
Yeah.
And I say that because a big problem people used to have, maybe even so much as early as a year ago, was they would store all of their documents inside of Outlook.
Yeah. Oh, it's a file system for them.
Right, and that's not what it was designed for. So, they kind of patch up Outlook to try to make it run just in the little increments a little bit better. But now they've said, like, well, let's take it out of there. We'll put it in OneDrive. You can still have access to it anytime, anywhere, like you normally would. We have these apps on your mobile devices now. So
I love the apps on there.
Right, so that in itself is revolutionary.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you're correct, and I think we've only scratched the surface of your pillar 2.
Yeah.
But
we skipped around a little bit. That's okay.
We did skip around a little bit, but I'd love to have you back so that we can discuss the next pillar.
I think we keep talking about this stuff because this is what we're about, and we're using the stuff. I call it dog fooding, and I wouldn't believe it unless we were doing it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.